So in this segment, we're going to be discussing kind of more of Labour's defence of the sleaze, the donations, the bribes, and we're going to be discussing why it is a big deal, despite what people in the Labour Party and what other commentators might say to you. So, this is what Emily Thornberry is claiming.
It is not corruption. It is not. It's giving a bone to the media who want to go for us, but it's got nothing to do with propriety. It's got nothing to do with ethics.
If
It's
there was
got nothing
nothing
to do
wrong,
with
then
corruption.
why did they say, OK, we won't take any more
Because they're
free
fed up
clothes?
with all these headlines.
None of this is terminal. It just feels as though it's got a little bit messy, and messy a lot quicker than I think some Labour politicians even thought it would.
If we accept for a moment your basic premise, which is that this is all nonsense and tittle-tattle.
This is all nonsense and tittle-tattle.
Then isn't the bigger crime that you haven't, as a party, given us something more substantial to talk about? And that the first few weeks of Labour's government has all been about how bad everything is and not about what you're going to do about it.
So this is why the Thornberry argument is nonsense about the media running with this. Is it a big story? Yes. Taking these kind of donations and things like that, it's a huge story because it creates conflicts of interest. That's the big problem. It's one of the problems anyways, because who are you working for at that point, especially when the government has to make certain decisions? The Premier League regulator being the best example of that. Starmer taking donations from the Premier League. The question is, why would they be donating for you? They're in your ear, in the corporate box. They can tell you why it's a bad idea. The people you hang around with, those execs, they can push you to maybe not make certain decisions. They're buying influence, your time. That's what they want, and they've got it. Some of the stuff that's been coming out is just crazy to me. So this is about the donations.
All said that they're not going to be taking gifts of money, holidays, and all of that. If it's wrong now, it must have been wrong last year. Will they give the money back?
Look, it was in line with the rules, but we just want to draw a line.
So this is one of the key things that the Labour Party keep arguing. The rules. It was within the rules, so it's fine. But there is a moral point here, like these vested interests that are offering you money, what do they want in return? That's the key question.
Under this,
well,
move on and get on and deliver for the British people and what they voted for.
Well,
it's like Boris Johnson, we're going to move on, get Brexit done, sort of deal with COVID or whatever. What you're talking about is a non-story. Here's the more important thing. And Labour keep going back to, sorting out the foundations or some other nonsense.
you won't draw a line under it until you make clear how this actually represents transparency when support turns out to be skirts, and why, or suits, or whatever it is, and you're saying we're not going to do it anymore, but actually it was okay before. You won't draw a line until you sort that out. Will they give the money back?
Well, if they've declared it in line with the rules and they've followed it as far, very clearly they have.
This is one of the things they actually learned from, Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson made the mistake of not declaring donations, and that's what made it worse. The brown envelope situation. So that's one of the things they actually learned from Boris Johnson's situation, is just declare it. One of the major issues, which is something we'll discuss later, is certain things weren't declared properly as gifts. They were declared as office support, which we'll be discussing later on.
Then I see no reason to do so.
Look, the problem is, why this is hard to understand is if they followed the rules, there's nothing wrong. Why did they decide to stop doing it now?
In order to draw a line under it so we can move on and not be talking...
The problem is that you've made a new line, which is, if it wasn't wrong, why stop doing it? That's the thing, Labour just seemed to fail to understand. Like, when Boris Johnson did this stuff, if it was things that were particularly bad, then he would backtrack from it and say, look, we're kind of done here, which is what Labour are trying to do. But if Labour just said, well, it's within the rules, and if the rules need to be changed, then that's something we'll look into, if that's something the public want or whatever. But, at the moment, it's well within the rules for us to take these gifts and carry on governing or some nonsense. None of this stuff feels kind of pushing with them. For me, personally, I think you taking donations is wrong, morally wrong, ethically wrong. When you run on a campaign of change, attacking the Tory sleaze, overtaking things like donations, and then you yourself take these gifts and donations, you're not much better than them in that regard.
About this and talking frankly about other things.
Look, in 1997, when Labour came in before, something similar happened. Labour had got a £1 million donation from Bernie Ecclestone, the guy who used to run Formula One. They gave it back in the end. Why not the same now?
I wish they would ask about the hedge fund that donated £4 million to the Labour Party. That's the thing they should really be asking about as well.
big distinction that I would draw is that if we're talking about the donations from Wahid Ali, he's a Labour peer. There's no suggestion that any of the donations were given in order to give rise to undue influence. He's a Labour peer. He's been a member of the Labour Party for a very long time, and he wanted to help secure a Labour government. That is not the same thing as what you've just described there in terms of what took place in 1997. Although I would caveat, my knowledge of what took place in 1997 is rather limited by the fact it's what I read in the papers, given that at that point in time.
So you don't really know what was happening back then, so I guess it's kind of a dumb point to say it's different now when, you know, you didn't really know what happened back then. It's a bit of a strange defence. It goes on.
From the Labour donor, Lord Ali, last year.
So she accepted £14,000, for an event that was related to her birthday party, to host journalists and other groups of people.
Yeah. What for exactly?
Yep. So I received that money from Wahid Ali, who's a long-standing Labour peer. It was used to fund 2 events, all of which was declared properly and thoroughly. That's why that information is in the public domain. The first event was ahead of my birthday, so I was turning 40. I thought it was a good opportunity to get people together in a professional context. So it was journalists, trade unionists, education people, MPs and shadow cabinet. The second event was an event that I held also again for lobby journalists, for people in the education world.
For lobby journalists. So you're buying favour, inviting them to parties, getting them in the in-crowd here. Here's a scoop, here, you can chill out with me at the party, etc. This line between politicians and the media is so thin. It's a massive problem in itself. Organising these events, taking essentially donation money to curry favour with the media is very ugly.
As part of a reception. That's, it was in a work context,
That's a very nice thing.
So what kind of work did you get done? What policies came out of this?
But if a Tory had done that 2 years ago, I know exactly what you'd be saying to me this morning. They should pay for their own birthday parties.
Look, this was in a work context. I didn't even invite my own...
You just said the same thing.
It's not really a work thing, is it? If it's related to your 40th birthday, it makes no sense.
Come on.
I didn't even... My own family didn't come to that. It was in a work context. I celebrated my actual 40th birthday with my family. We went for a pizza. I celebrated with my kids. This was where I got together colleagues, journalists, actually, trade unionists, education people. It was in a very different kind of context. Wahid is a Labour peer. He's been a Labour peer.
It makes it okay. He's a Labour peer. He's one of us. He's on the team. He just wants to get us in, even though he particularly donates mostly to centrist candidates. It's just embarrassing. This is the kicker for me when it comes to this stuff.
You are in a privileged position as a Member of Parliament. You will sometimes be offered the opportunity to go to events such as Wimbledon. I was invited as Education Secretary. Shadow members of, shadow ministers are often given similar invitations, and government ministers are often given such invitations. It was declared. I appreciate it is a privilege to be there, but I was very much there in my role as Education Secretary.
What about Taylor Swift?
Look, I'll be honest, it was a hard one to turn down. I appreciate there was big demand for the tickets. It was a privilege to be there.
So, she could have paid for the tickets or donated that money to charity, but instead she got, tickets worth hundreds of pounds to go with her family and her kids, right? She's talking about a difficult decision here. You got pensioners who are going to have to decide between heating and eating their house because you've cut the winter fuel allowance, and I don't think there'll be a lot more support coming their way. You can have children, families deciding, again, about heating and eating, because you're not going to get rid of something like the 2-child cap, for example. So, spare me when you're talking about tough decisions. I don't want to hear it. These people are going to be walking an extreme tightrope this year because there's not more support coming from the government, from a Labour government who's meant to be on the side of the working class. And you're talking about tough decisions about going to see Taylor Swift. Spare me, please.
One of my children, was keen to go along. It's hard to say no.
Naming your kids. It must be hard for parents to be able to tell their kids, they might not be able to eat properly, or they can't afford to heat their house. That's tough. That's pressure. Reminds me of what Mourinho said a while ago. He talked about pressure isn't winning titles. Pressure is when you can't feed your children. That's pressure. Refusing tickets to see Taylor Swift. It's easy. If you want to go, you earn more than enough money. You could have donated that money to charity if you wanted to.
For tickets in those circumstances, but it was declared. I've been clear about that, but I do recognise that, I'm in a fortunate position to be able to...
Oh, well, that's all right then. I'm lucky. I'm an elected official. Do I want to represent my constituents now? I want to watch Taylor Swift because I'm a Swiftie. This clip pisses me off a bit because this lady here, evidently she can do a good job for journalism, but she writes hit pieces in like the Telegraph and stuff. She works for GB News evidently. It's up for politicians to go on these channels. They can refuse if they want. Obviously, I wouldn't be the happiest with that, but it annoys me that some of these people can actually do decent journalism when they want to. It's just they pick and choose when to do it.
I'll ask you about this story in the Mail on Sunday. The suggestion that Lord Ali paid thousands for Education Secretary's 40th birthday party. Is that true?
So what Lord Ali, who's a long-standing Labour peer, paid for was 2 events when I was Shadow Education Secretary. One ahead of my 40th birthday. I thought was a good opportunity in a professional context to get journalists, education people, trade unionists and MPs along.
She's on her brief pretty good there. Whoops.
In the education press, again, in a professional context, to discuss the work of...
So the birthday element was what then? I don't quite get it. It was an official do for you as Shadow Education Secretary, but you also had some cake.
Oh, we didn't have any cake.
Oh, there's a picture of you with some cake. Is that a different...
That was on my actual birthday.
Oh, got it, okay.
In my office.
Ali, so you do have a birthday celebration, but it's part of a department...
It was when I was Shadow Education Secretary, so it was ahead of the election. I should just say I didn't even invite my own family along to this. It was very much in a professional context.
Has Lord Ali ever donated to your wardrobe, your spectacles? Has he ever loaned you an apartment in London or New York?
No,
these are things he's done for other people.
Everything that's been donated to me has been declared in line with the rules. What I would say about Lord Ali is that he's been a Labour peer for, I think...
Sorry, I kind of going over because she's using the same points, but...
For 25 years.
To say who sanctioned this pass, it was Sue...
It's about the press pass about Lord Ali.
Gray. That happened after he donated £10,000 to Leon Conlon's campaign. Leon Conlon is now the MP for Beckenham and Penge. He's also Sue Gray's son. There's something quite murky about that. I think if that arrangement had happened under a Tory government, ministers like you would be on the airwaves having a real go at the opposition about that.
And journalists like you either wouldn't cover it or defend it.
I think you've got a Labour peer, a very, very long-standing Labour peer, who donates to Labour politicians, Labour candidates.
He donated to 2 campaigns, and one of them was Conlon's.
No,
he's Sue Gray's... in the election campaign, as far as just for the election campaign, he gives money to Sue Gray's son, and the next thing we know, he gets a Downing Street pass. You have to admit, that looks a bit dodgy.
He's donated to lots of Labour candidates and politicians.
Why does he need...
In this specific election, she's just dodging the question here because he has donated to other candidates in the past, like David Miliband, for example, from what I've read. But in this specific context, you've got 2 candidates who are donated to, and one of them was Sue Gray's son.
A Downing Street pass.
As I understand it, he no longer has a Downing
Why
Street
did
pass.
He have one?
I genuinely don't know the circumstances
so he can have a look at
of that.
Farmers' wardrobes, or
come on. No, I think the reason.
Oh, come on! What a poor response.
That he donates to Labour politicians.
Surely you'd want to find out as a Labour MP. Would you not want to find out what's going on there?
We just want to draw a line under this and move on. Of course it's a distraction. It is frustrating that we're talking about these kinds of stories rather than talking about the change that we're delivering on, and we just want to get on with that.
But then that's because of the mistake that they made.
No, it was all declared properly in line with the rules, but they've been clear.
So do you think the criticism was unfair? Has been unfair then?
No, I don't think it really. I don't think it's for politicians really to question or challenge in that sense what is reported on.
Oh, Emily Thornberry did earlier.
I'm more than happy to field tough questions, to come out and speak with journalists who can ask whatever they want to ask. That's an important part of our democracy.
Do you understand that why it could be that this has angered so many people? And I'm not talking about journalists, I'm talking about people who ring into shows like this, because the Prime Minister is a man of not inconsiderable means. He gets paid £167,000 a year. He was a successful barrister. If he needs someone...
It's worth millions of pounds.
...to pay for his glasses for him, on that sort of money, then how do you expect a pensioner who's on 15 or 16 grand to pay more for their fuel?
Beautiful, beautiful framing, beautiful question.
This winter.
Look, I completely understand, and I do recognise that as politicians, particularly as senior politicians, we're very lucky in many ways. I completely recognise that, and I know.
But then you're just creating one rule for yourselves and one rule for other people. That you can earn all this money from the public, but also accept these kind of donations and things like that. It doesn't make sense because you're there to represent the public, not to represent moneyed interests. This idea that Labour are trying to push, or politicians try and push, that they're not out of touch. They understand the common person. You're receiving all this free stuff. it just doesn't make sense to me.
I know that life is really hard at the minute for lots of people, including for the people that I represent, and that's why, what we're setting out this week.
And it's so difficult, but you voted to get rid of the winter fuel allowance, so you must not know it that well.
Around housing reform, making sure that people can live in safe and homes that are to a high standard is so important.
One of the issues with that is that councils are the ones responsible for inspections. So unless you're going to increase the amount of money councils have, improving the legislation does help to an extent, but it's the inspections that we need more of.
Plans that we have around GB Energy are about creating more jobs, about over the long term cutting people's bills. But of course I recognise that in what is a really tough environment for people at the moment, we politicians have it easier than lots of people. Of course I do. I recognise the good fortune.
Why did he need someone to pay for his glass?
That's the point, though, isn't it? It's not about just being in a privileged position. If you're trying to claim that he can't look nice or he can't dress well or his family need help or whatever with their clothing, despite the fact that he's in the top 5% of earners, how are the rest of us meant to survive? We still have to go to work and whatever, and actually look presentable, depending on your job role.
£1,000 to 7 cabinet ministers at the moment.
I've kind of jumbled these up a lot.
Except that there could be a perception, at the very least again, that one man giving so much money to so few people at the very top of government could be a little bit of a problem.
So Lord Ali, who I've only ever met in my time as a Labour MP, is someone that came from a pretty humble background. Labour peer has donated to Labour politics. That's what he...
And paying for your birthday party.
He did donate. He donated to me to fund a number of events. Yes, absolutely, declared in the correct way.
Was that essential to secure a Labour government, that birthday party?
It was a great opportunity, around that to have an event for colleagues in Westminster, including journalists, MPs,
So the answer is no.
Cabinet, as was people in the education world. And I also hosted another event alongside that for journalists, including those who work in education, where I was joined by my colleagues from the Shadow Education team.
Would you accept more money from Lord Ali for other birthday parties?
I don't, to be honest with you, I don't usually make a big thing about my birthday, and that was a professional kind of context to it. My own birthday.
So next year, you could get Lord Ali to donate for your 41st or whatever it is, and you can claim it's a work event and invite lobby journalists and things like that all over again. MPs accepted over £700,000 of freebies last year, from helicopter rides to Swift tickets, and despite as this person points out here, the Tory MPs took more advantage. More on average than Labour MPs, but they would do because they would have been in government. So it's not a good. If this is meant to be a defence of Labour, it's not that great, to be honest. And even then, the argument of they're as bad as each other, it doesn't wash. What we need to do is fundamentally change the system, and Labour aren't going to do it if we keep accepting this argument of, well, it's fine because it's within the rules.
Have tanked. I think Rishi Sunak is now personally rating better than he is. Do you acknowledge that all of these conversations, including this one, are having a damaging impact on the perception of your government, and do you feel the need to apologise for that?
I agree it's distracting. I'd much rather be having a conversation with you this morning about what we're setting out this week in Liverpool, whether that's on housing or education or energy and much more besides. We have faced some tough choices, absolutely, and
I mean, you had, deciding on whether to go to see Taylor Swift or not.
Of course, people want to see us getting on and delivering, but, on every poll that pops up on every occasion, I've always said they're a snapshot in time. I do recognise the big challenge that we faced as an incoming government, the tough choices that has involved, but how this week we will be demonstrating to people that we're getting on and delivering the change that they voted for.
Do you want to apologise to people for how it looks at the moment?
I think it's a distraction. I'm not sure that that's required, but I appreciate
It's not a distraction, though, is it? It's not... ethically, this is wrong. There are massive conflicts of interest brewing here, from the people you've taken money from. It's not just Lord Ali. It's that hedge fund. It's the Premier League. There are massive conflicts of interest here that they just don't. The journalists aren't quite asking the right questions with some of this stuff.
It's distracting. I'd much rather be talking to you about what I've done in the last 3 months as Education Secretary, and it's fair to say that we've done rather a lot. Reforming Ofsted, Skills England, curriculum review, more support for speech and language for our youngest children. I mean, there's an awful lot. We've really hit the ground running, and of course I'd much rather be talking to you about that.
Mm-hmm.
Just with this story, this was such an own goal, and You got this person here from the NEU saying that he thinks it's difficult to pass on a message of tough choices if people don't feel like the government are enjoying that too. And I think that's one of the key things there, that you can't push this painful budget, all of this kind of austerity idea, when the fact is you're getting a corporate box office at the Emirates Stadium that's worth, I think, tens of thousands of pounds. You're getting free suits, glasses. Your wife's getting free stuff. The Chancellor's getting free stuff. Deputy PM's getting free stuff and a holiday. You can't push this idea that, we're all in this together. The thing that David Cameron kind of pushed at the start of the coalition government, when you're getting free tickets to see T Swifty. It just doesn't wash. And I get like people talking like they're angry about this story and whatever.
Talking about? Why are we not talking about the £40 million contract that Matt Hancock gave his local pub landlord?
We did talk about that on the channel. We did. That
was our money, not some businessman's money. That's our taxpayer money. What about the £200 million contract that Baroness Moan got with her husband?
That's under police investigation. The police are literally investigating that as we speak.
Where's that money gone? Liz Truss destroyed the entire country's economy in less time than this. Give the guy a break. Give him a chance. What about Dominic Cummings getting his eyes tested, breaking the law at the Barnard car?
Again, the police allegedly investigated that. I don't think anything ever came of that.
What was his salary? I mean, geez Louise, we're talking about rubbish.
This is the most embarrassing defence I've ever heard in my life. Like, genuinely, if your argument again is, well, it's not as bad as the Tories, that's a crappy defence, because that's not going to get us the change we need. That's not going to get us anywhere near what we need in order to get the country really moving. Because the bar isn't the Conservative Party for Labour. The bar really is kind of more like Attlee with, the creation of the NHS. Massive social, massive investment in things like social housing, etc. That's the real bar. Changing people's lives fundamentally. That's the bar, not the Conservatives. People who set the bar as, oh, they're better than the Conservatives. Like, I don't care. Because I know the Conservatives are trash. You know the Conservatives are trash. If you set the bar at being slightly better than the Conservatives, you know who we're going to end up with again? The Conservatives. Because you haven't done enough. That's what's going to happen. This stuff here, again, it's just embarrassing. Like,
no Prime Minister should be in a position where they have to rely on donations of clothes. They should be.
I mean, he's not. He's a multi-million. He's a millionaire who makes over £100,000 a year and doesn't pay rent. Like, he can easily afford some nice suits and a tailor.
Substantially paid.
I agree with you, Ayo. This is the thing. Exactly. This makes me feel queasy. It's not queasy about the fact that Starmer's taking donations. I feel queasy about the fact that people out there in the country feel that we should not pay for our Prime Minister and his wife, by the way, to look the part for us. I think we should.
I think they can afford that themselves, Chief.
Yeah, I get the point.
The idea of, having posh suits. Spencer's or other shops are, of course, available. So perfectly decent suits for not terribly much money.
You're not saying he should wear off-the-peg suits, are you?
Oh, how dare he wear off-the-peg suits? Yeah, it's not that bad. Do you think all his suits should be tailor-made? Like he's some member of the mafia?
I absolutely am.
Well, I mean, well, okay, as long as they can be tailored properly. I mean, I want him to look smart.
He doesn't look smart, though. That's the thing. His trousers are baggy as hell. The top looks okay, but the trousers look awful sometimes.
Genuinely do, because he's my Prime Minister, and I may not always be his biggest fan. But
if Boris Johnson dressed okay, would that be all right then? Would you give him a pass? There's a lot more. This is kind of the Rayner half of it.
With someone who was then another Labour MP, Sam Tarry. The rules state that this needs to be registered if it was part or all of the visit was paid for by someone else, and you didn't register that.
So this is the trip she went on to New York, where I believe she stayed at Lord Ali's accommodation.
You weren't transparent about that. Did you break the rules?
Well, first of all, I didn't go to New York with another person. That person went to New York, and I met up with them, and I met up with a number of friends while I was in New York. It was a personal holiday, and I think I followed the rules. In fact, I went above that, and I wanted to do that to be transparent about the connection that I had of the use of that apartment.
But they stayed in that apartment. Sam Tarry, who used to be a Labour MP, stayed in that apartment, and you didn't declare it. Did you break the rules?
I don't believe I broke any rules.
It's more of the Boris Johnson defence. I don't think any rules were broken.
I had the use of the apartment. and I disclosed that I had the use of the...
So let the independent investigator deal with it then and say, look, I'm calling for an independent investigation by the relevant parties within Parliament to check this out.
Department. In fact, I think I was overly transparent because I think it was important.
Sounds like Trump. You know, I went, oh, we did more than anyone else. We were overly transparent.
Despite it being a personal holiday, because that person, as a friend, had already donated to me in the past for my deputy leadership.
So you're not sorry for doing that? You're not sorry for that?
It's interesting. So we're hearing, is that Lord Ali donated to her leadership, her deputy leadership campaign? Lord Ali normally backs the centrist candidates. So it's interesting he picked her when Rayner was meant to be someone who's on the left.
For that, you're not saying to people this morning, you know what, maybe that was a misjudgment. Maybe I should have declared absolutely everything, because the rules, I'll just read that to our viewers. Members should register in this category any visit, whether accompanying the member or not. It says pretty clearly, if someone else is with you, you're meant to declare it, and you didn't.
It says if you're on parliamentary business or it's in connection with your parliamentary duties. That's how I understood it. It was a private holiday that I think it was important that people knew, because I'd had a relationship where I'd had a donation from that individual, a substantial donation to help me towards becoming the deputy leader, because I had to run my campaign. I thought it was important that people knew that I'd used their apartment for a couple of days. I paid for the holiday myself.
It's just a bit weird, this one. It's not as weird as the birthday stuff, but it's a bit weird.
The Labour Party very successfully created this story around Tory sleaze and cronies and corruptions. You yourself said, we need to know what these donors were promised or expected in return for their generosity. That was you saying that.
Yeah, and we saw, and Laura, we saw that VIP fast lanes on taxpayers' money, billions of pounds wasted during the COVID pandemic. These are individual donations. Nobody's been given billions of pounds.
This is where defence really falls apart. Let's go back again.
To me.
I think the issue here is some people see a double standard, because for several years the Labour Party very successfully created this story around Tory sleaze and cronies and corruptions. You yourself said, we need to know what these donors were promised or expected in return for their generosity. That was you saying that.
Yeah, and we saw, and Laura, we saw that VIP fast lanes on taxpayers' money, billions of pounds wasted during the COVID pandemic. These are individual donations. Nobody's been given billions of pounds contracts.
So what she's saying is, under the Tories, we saw donations go in from, Tory donors or whatever, and they got billions of pounds worth of contracts. So, we're seeing, essentially we saw donations going to the Labour Party, and she's saying, well, we haven't done, those contracts. But you haven't done them yet. Like, this is not a very good defence. I was saying, well, the Tories took donations and they then gave out these contracts. You've also taken donations. So it's the expectation from your donors that you will also give out contracts. Like, do you see, this defence, in my opinion, it doesn't really make sense. Unless I've got it wrong, which I'll accept, but I don't think I have.
Billions of pounds contracts as a result. That's the distinction for me, is that people were given jobs in executive roles. People were given, contracts worth billions of pounds when we didn't actually see the benefits of that. I think that was the distinction for me.
Especially when, Labour are talking about things like PFI contracts and stuff. Are some of these donors going to get these PFI contracts? You've muddled everything now. So even if they apply for it properly and go through the proper channels, if we see someone who's made a donation to the Labour Party get a contract, or any kind of financial kickback, rightfully or wrongfully, from the Labour Party, it's going to have that kind of air of corruption. So what she's done, this defence she has made here, is a terrible defence, in my opinion. Because saying, look, when the Tories took donations, we saw what they gave out, which was these billions of pounds of contracts. We haven't done it. We have, the Labour Party arguing we haven't done that, but you've been in charge for 3 months. You've still got a 5-year parliament, or 4 and a bit year parliament to get through. This is not a good defence, in my opinion. This is more of that rule stuff, which is not that important.
Someone's apartment. It wasn't that I had a luxury holiday.
We've talked about that.
And I did that, and I disclosed it. In terms of the donation that I had from a clothing company, again, I put that out in the public domain and made sure that people understood.
Some of this stuff we'll be discussing in a bit, because it's quite murky regarding the donations.
That's where I got that clothing from. And I get that people are frustrated, in particular the circumstances that we're in.
Yeah.
But donations for gifts and hospitality and, you know, monetary donations have been a feature of our politics for a very long time. People can look it up and can see what people have had donations for, and the transparency is really important.
But you that's all right. You know, we're transparent with our corruption. So that's all right then. We're transparent with our bribes. That's all right then.
Saying to people, basically, suck this up.
What they should do is just get a sponsor, like here, of who donated the clothing this was donated. That's what they should do. Just have a big sponsor that's there or there. And if it's like a really big sponsor, you can have it here, front and centre.
We're going to carry on doing it because it's been like this forever.
I'm not saying that. I get that people are angry, and I get that people are upset.
But you're not going to change the rules.
I think that the transparency is there so people can see that. Now, if there is a national debate about how we fund politics and how we do that,
maybe it's time to start that. Maybe that's something you can see if you can get a parliamentary report into. You know, how we can change political funding.
That's another, and I hear that people are frustrated with that, but we have a system at the moment that says if you get donations, that has to be declared, and the rules.
But you can also say no. You can say no to these donations. You're choosing to say yes. It's not like you know, Lord Ali saying here's 10 G's for a dress, and you say, damn it, I have to take this. It's not like that.
Have to apply to everybody, and I think that is correct, so that people can see where you've had donations and where that potential influence is, so that people can see the transparency.
But you may have been transparent about it, and actually some of your donations that were turned out to be for clothes were listed as being generic, so they weren't completely out there in the public domain. But you say you get people are frustrated. She should have gone with that line and not moved on. I want to let you know how angry some of our viewers have been over this last week. Wendy emailed us saying it's extraordinary behaviour to accept clothing donations when the government feels justified to remove winter payments to pensioners. Eileen said it's morally indefensible for politicians to be doing this. Peter called you the goodie party. And Clive, who was a Labour Party member, said, I find it deeply disappointing that Labour seems no different from the Tories when it comes to freebies. Are we expected to believe that the donors get nothing in return? Lord Ali gave you individually more than 20.
You know, that's the key point. Again, it's the optics are really bad. And, you know, I don't think they ever understood that.
At the same time as they're threatening more austerity. We've disillusioned people within 8 weeks. As you said, there's been no honeymoon. People are really angry with Labour now about this behaviour.
I just don't get how you can talk about this painful austerity budget coming in and then over the last year and still to this day take all of these donations. It just doesn't, it looks awful, to be honest with you.
And then this...
the angle of it, the potential corruption, the conflicts of interest are one thing, but it looks awful when you're taking massive amounts of donations and you're telling people, sorry, we're going to take away funding for you to heat your house. I just find it maddening.
Overshadowing the Labour Party conference is this black cloud of a threat of another round of austerity in the budget. And people know how tough it is, the inheritance we've had from the Tories, but what they expect a Labour government to do is make the right choice. And the right choice certainly isn't another round of austerity. It will undermine our economic policies as well. It's just such a huge mistake. I'm baffled with some of these defences and things like that. I know that we're going through a lot of these, but it's going to be a long video. But just the scale of the situation, I just want you to kind of understand it if you've made it this far in.
How that looks, and that's why Keir has said very clearly, look, I'm not going to accept that sort of
very
free
clearly, but it took a long
thing.
time. I mean, it's taken. I mean, I've been presenting all week on various different media, and we
they've let this story drag out because again, they went to the Boris Johnson school of dealing with this stuff.
Been discussing it all week, and it's only now finally that the Prime Minister has said, well, I won't take any more of these sorts of gifts. He certainly didn't say it at the beginning, and he certainly didn't say, look, sorry about this, it looks awful, I really am sorry, I didn't think it was going to sort of come over this way, I didn't mean it, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. That's really not what happened, is it? He started it off and he doubled down for days and days.
He certainly wouldn't have wanted it to come across because it's not who he is and what he's about. And look, I think the really important thing about about these kind of questions, and they're the legitimate ones, and they're ones to ask is, first of all, are you being fully transparent? Look, the reason that everyone knows about the exact details of what things cost and all of that kind of thing is because Keir and the rest of us have been completely transparent. There's no suggestion.
It's because you have to be. Them's the rules. You have to be transparent. This is not a defence saying, oh, the only reason you know about these things because I told you. You know, the only reason you know I cheated on you is because I told you. This is not the defence you think it is. You have to declare this stuff, because if it gets out, which, you know, potentially could be leaked to the media about this stuff, well, you know, like, how do you think it's going to go? It's going to look even worse. You know, that's one of the things that sunk Boris Johnson, the Lord Brown envelope situation.
Suggestion that we haven't. That is in contrast to what has happened in the past, where these things have not been declared properly, and previous Conservative ministers were found in breach many times for not declaring them. And
yeah, because you learned from them. That's why you started declaring it. You know, some of the stuff was not declared properly, which again we'll get onto. But that's one of the many lessons you learned from Boris Johnson, I'm assuming.
Second reason that's
was
really important.
Was there transparency, for example, about Lord Ali having the key to number 10? Was that transparent, or was that found out, dug out, and
eventually it was leaked?
Eventually in the public domain. What's the reason for that kind of thing? Why would anybody have you know, unfettered access all areas to number 10 Downing Street?
I don't think it is unfettered access. I think on those first few days when you come in, you absolutely are surrounded by sort of political people who've helped you and supported you at that very short amount of time.
But he didn't need a pass. He could have, you know, he didn't need a press pass or whatever he had. It doesn't make sense. There's just so much going on here.
Successfully.
Oh, we've covered this one already. You know, Rayner talking about Boris Johnson here. Who do you think you are, Boris Johnson, telling working class people to rely on their own efforts when you go around with a begging bowl to Tory donors to pay for your posh new wallpaper and moan you can't live off 150,000 salary? Disgusting. And Boris Johnson did do that, and he was reliant on donors to fund his lifestyle, and that was wrong, just like it's wrong for you guys to keep taking donations and these bribes. You know, this was the thing I was mentioning earlier. Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister Rayner and Chancellor Rachel Reeves both took thousands of pounds of work clothing from rich donors that were declared as generic support for their work. The latest developments further call into question Prime Minister Keir Starmer's promise to lead a government of transparency. And again, they might not stop taking donations for clothing because they could run it as that. You know, the Parliamentary Code states that members should not record in the register donations of gifts which are intended to provide personal benefit under the category of any other support, which these things are obviously gifts. You know, and it mentions it, gifts such as clothing or jewellery should be recorded as gifts. They didn't do that. So the idea that they've been transparent, you know, Rayner has been, is garbage. And look, you know, I get people, you know, people are justifiably mad saying, where was the media talking about, you know, the Conservative Party when they were taking, you know, all of this money? The media did cover it. The problem with Boris Johnson is he was embroiled in scandal. And so you had one and then another and then another. You know, I'm not saying the media did a good job, not at all. But they did cover it. They did cover it quite a lot, I think, at the time. And, you know, it does go show you that our media is trash, but one of the, you know, the only few benefits of the media being trash is it's given a lot of people in independent media a job, like an ability to talk about this stuff without having the worry of editors or, you know, oh, if I say this thing, will this person not turn up my interview, etc. You know, Boris Johnson, 6.4 million, Theresa May, 3.5, Liz Truss, 1.1, Keir Starmer, you know, 899,000. When you look at it, though, one of these wasn't Prime Minister at the time. So he's still taking a lot of money. And which one does the right-wing media suddenly focus on? Well, obviously the right-wing media are going to focus on Starmer. But if these donations were justifiable, he would have been able to justify it to the people. The simple fact is they're not justifiable. You know, Starmer talking about this.
I think too many politicians these days have become a bit too self-entitled.
Okay, it's very quiet. So he said too many politicians these days have become a bit too self-entitled, which is irony. And, you know, ironically, you've given, I think, this former Tory MP the high ground on this one. Because you have become a bit self-entitled. You're talking about how, oh, you know, it'd be a bit too far if you couldn't go watch Arsenal. You know, oh, you know, we had a tough decision about, you know, going to a Taylor Swift concert. That sounds like self-entitlement to me. You know, this whole thing is just completely bizarre. Like, you got Tom Holland, obviously not Spider-Man, talking about, honestly, this is ridiculous. Why shouldn't members of the government look good? They're representing the country. I mean, Yeah, they actually do look decent in this picture. It's not going to cost them thousands of pounds to look like that. That's it. They can afford their own clothing. They're on a lot of money here. Otherwise, why aren't everyone just dressed in trackies all day or bloody jogging bottoms? You know, like, that's not the case. People can afford their own clothing, just like this lot should be able to. You know, you got this guy Joe Skeeping saying this whole episode has been a masterclass in people pretending not to understand what the scandal is, which is you're selling access. The clothing is just a means for donors to gain access to you. And this is really the part with the bite. You know, Labour taking £4 million from a Cayman Island registered hedge fund with shares worth hundreds of millions of pounds in fossil fuels, private health firms, and arms manufacturing. This is a real scandal for the Labour Party. And again, you know, for the Tories, this is expected of them. You know, like, you know, my expectations for the Tory Party are so low; they're underground. For the Labour Party, they are higher. Because you keep talking about moral virtues, and we need your morals to be higher. You're meant to be the party that represents working people. What other choice do we have but to expect better of you, especially when you keep talking about bringing change and all of this change and, you know, attacking the Tories on ethics, and yet here you are, you know, being embroiled in sleaze. You know, and I get this is a problem. You know, you've got here Robert Jenrick, potential new Tory candidate, taking £75,000 from a firm with no employees, has never made a profit, and has £332,000 in debt. This again is another scandal. The only difference is why I personally don't care about this story that much is he's not in power. Yeah, he can try and shift the Overton window from opposition a little bit, but it's very difficult to do so. So, you know, again, this is a big story. This is, you know, kind of endemic of the problem that we're in. But what if he argues, oh, it's within the rules, so it's fine? You know, are the people who kept saying, you know, because it's in the rules and because he's declared it, it's fine, are those same people going to come out and defend Robert Jenrick now? Because they're the same people saying, no, this is a big scandal. Why aren't you talking about this? They're both scandals in their own right. And both should be discussed. The only difference is one person is in charge and has the levels of power and the other one doesn't. That's why the Jenrick story isn't as big a story, especially when we know for the Conservative Party, our standards for them are lower. It's like water is wet or there's crime in Gotham. You know, we're going to discuss one of the defenders of the Labour Party here.
The government will help you fiddle the Treasury out of £45 million, and in return...
This is about Robert Jenrick and the corruption he was involved in whilst he was Housing Minister.
We'll say, thank you very much, here's 12,000. The whole thing just is utterly ridiculous. And, you know, and was there... And don't get me wrong, I think the way Starmer and Labour in general have approached this sort of accepting gifts thing has been politically naive. It's actually quite weird because they've now said they're not going to accept any more clothing gifts. And it's like, the clothing gifts were not an issue.
I mean, they were because people were buying access. You know, you can try and make the argument it's Lord Ali or whatever, but, you know, we don't even know if that was all Lord Ali's money. You know, just like the Lord Brownlow situation.
Some other things which are more of an issue, arguably. The clothing gifts are absolutely not. But here's the thing that gets me. Why are they saying, well, we won't accept them in future? Why don't they say, OK, if you don't like it, we'll just change the rules? Why are they hamstringing themselves?
It's because they still want to accept donations, in my opinion. But this is what I mean. This defence... It's just abysmal. You know, this is the money, 12 grand that we know of, and it gets worse. You know, in his scripted content, I think
it would be furious. And which would the public care more about? Starmer getting £24,000 worth of gifts and donations. Remember, it's donations as well in the last year to help him get elected, or Jenrick getting £75,000 from a company which doesn't exist. And why aren't those who claim to oppose the Tories concerned about this? Why is John McDonnell whining about Starmer accepting gifts for which there has been no quid pro quo?
Not that we've seen yet. You know, all of those people who made donations to the Conservative Party in around 2019 who might not have received, you know, those COVID contracts at the time. The reason you do it is because when contracts come up, they'll keep you in mind. Or when there's a chance to throw you some money, you'll take it. Such as with the PFI contracts. Labour keep talking up the PFI contracts. Do you think that these donors won't be like, yo, dog, do you remember when I gave you those 10 Gs? You know, do you want that money to keep rolling in? They won't say it in so many words because they know what it's going to look like. But, you know, this idea there's been no quid pro quo. You know, how do we go from, well, Labour barely been in charge, So you have to give them a chance to, well, they haven't given out any money to their donors, therefore no quid pro quo. How can we juggle the two? It doesn't make any sense. They barely had any time to give out these contracts. We haven't even had a budget yet. So when it comes to defending Labour, it's always, well, they barely had a chance, no budget's been passed yet. When it comes to the other side of this is, well, there's no quid pro quo. Well, obviously not. The budget hasn't been announced yet. When they do stuff like, like Rishi Sunak did with the childcare, you had some of these companies that were going to benefit from the childcare being his wife's companies. Things like that. When they get the chance to do it, that's when the situation will come up. In terms of donating to these, giving money back to these companies, giving contracts back to these companies, that's when it'll come up. This defence is just brain dead.
And which is normal for senior politicians and, as it turns out, even some of his backbench mates across the political spectrum. Not in the slightest bit concerned about the obviously dodgy donation to Generic. Not a single breath has come from him on that. Or the fact...
Which again, how the Generic thing is bad. But he's not the one in charge. He's got no influence on Generic. He's trying to influence Starmer into stopping making these decisions.
That Farage has been gifted travel over this summer that was worth more than all of Starmer's donations in the last year combined. This is why Labour are their own worst enemy. When it comes time to pick an opponent, right, we want a fight, we're up for a fight, who are we going to pick for an opponent? They pick themselves over the Tories every time.
No, I think he's right here, and I kind of agree with him to an extent, but we saw this under the Corbyn years as well, where, you had so much Labour infighting. You had your own guy here, Phil, picking holes in Corbyn, but suddenly when it was time to do that with Starmer, he said, no, you're helping the Tories. But whatever, that's besides the point. The key point being is that these are all big, problematic stories. The only difference is there's only one person here with the levers of power, and it's not Robert Jenrick and it's not Nigel Farage.
And I'm not suggesting people should back Labour out of tribal loyalty. I hate that in politics.
That's mad, because that's what you do.
If your own party's not doing the right thing, absolutely demand better.
So why aren't you demanding better?
Starmer, Reeves and Rayner have not broken any rules. It's not even like people are calling for the rules to change. They're just calling for Starmer to follow some different, unwritten rules that nobody ever even mentioned before.
Yeah, because we expect him to do better. We never expected him to take donations like this. I never expected him to make conflicts of interest like this.
It's not like we've had years of people saying, oh, we shouldn't accept these sorts of gifts. No one said it. No one...
I think I have. I think I've been saying that. We shouldn't have this system. I think there are other people in the space who've said that as well.
Had it before now. The Tory press decided to try an angle and everyone jumped on it. It's insane how people are saying that Starmer should not have done a thing, which is perfectly within the rules.
Again, just because it's within the rules doesn't make it morally right. That's the thing people understand. Like, you have rules, you have laws, and you also have morality. Morally, this is the wrong thing to do. You create massive conflicts of interest, which is something we'll be talking about.
Have a beef with the rules. Either argue for the rules to change or maybe show a little more concern for politicians who break the rules. When Johnson had Brownlow paid...
Again, this is all they have, is Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, that's it.
...furnish his flats. That was against the rules. It was so against the rules that he lied to his ethics...
So partially he's wrong here, and we'll actually discuss that in a minute.
...advisor about it, and when the truth came out and he had to admit it, Johnson didn't just go, oh yeah, sorry, well, he did say I forgot, but he didn't say, oh, I'll update my declarations. No, he didn't update the declarations because it was very, very against the rules. It
wasn't actually against the rules according to the ethics advisor. So he's actually got this completely wrong. Let's address this now. So texts between Mr. Johnson and Lord Brownlow were revealed during a separate investigation by the elections watchdog. Mr. Johnson was strongly criticised by his standards advisor Lord Geit for not disclosing the messages during an official inquiry into the Downing Street flat renovations. However, Lord Geit said he would not have changed the verdict of his original investigation last year that Mr. Johnson had not breached the ministerial code. So this article from the time around January 2022. So Lord Geit actually said that Boris Johnson hadn't broken the rules. The only problem is he didn't declare it, which he should have done. So what Phil's argument for this is technically he's wrong, unless he's got a different article or a more updated one. If we check his sources, he's got the generic article and he's got the donations record. So if he actually had his sources up, he could fact check me, but he doesn't, and I can't fact check him because he doesn't put sources up. But fundamentally, according to this BBC article, he was wrong, because Lord Guy said he would not change his original verdict from his investigation last year that Johnson had not breached the ministerial code. This is regarding the Lord Brownlow donations. So had Boris Johnson declared these donations, he probably would have been within the rules. And then you've got Angela Rayner arguing that the ministerial code prohibits not just actual but also perceived conflicts of interest. Oh, isn't that interesting? You know, when you've got the Premier League, regulator being talked about in law, and you've got donations from the Premier League going to, the Prime Minister, you would think that's a perceived conflict of interest, no? And Rayner talks about a reasonable person could perceive that Lord Brownlow's financial relationship with the Prime Minister has provided him with the privilege access to the government, and that relationship was undeclared at the time. She wrote in a letter to Lord Guy. I guess the only difference is that, Starmer's relationship with Lord Ali was declared late, but it was still declared. And I think he declared it to avoid a situation like this. I think that's the reason why. So this argument he's making here is complete garbage.
Paid the money back rather than just update. When the 2023 budget was announced, remember, it meant a lot of public money finding its way into the hands of businesses where Sunak's wife had an interest. Sunak didn't declare that interest, and just because it's his wife, the ministerial code says you have to for a spouse as well. So Sunak did not declare that interest. He broke the rules. Now, it's not that he declared it late, because people go, Starmer's declared his late. Yeah, it was a late declaration by like a day or two. Sunak didn't declare it at all.
I think Starmer declared these donations because someone must have pointed this kind of stuff out to him.
And this was against the rules, and the parliamentary authorities said it was against the rules. There are examples of rules breaking. That's what's been happening here. No rules breaking from Labour. No one seemed to care about Tory rules breaking. All of a sudden, it's a national scandal when a Labour politician does something within the rules that nobody had an issue.
Which, again, I'm going to go back to this, right, which is Lord Guy saying that his verdict was Boris Johnson hadn't broken the ministerial code if he had declared it. If he had declared this money, this £112,000. So all he had to do was be transparent about this, and he would have been within the rules. Does that make it morally correct? No.
You with before. Give me a break. Sure, there are some examples of the acceptance of gifts I wouldn't have done myself. And you may be thinking, well, I wouldn't have done that. Well, there's some things I wouldn't have done. But I can't judge the behaviour of others by my own standards, but by the standards we as a society set. And that is the rules we set. It's not up to me how people should behave. That being said, Labour have also been naive. They have to expect...
And this is where he always bats away Labour's problems with, the comms team being trash or Labour being politically naive. Oh, it's not their fault, they're naive. How could you blame someone who is not experienced? Who's not a veteran of the game?
Tory media to make mountains out of molehills with them and molehills out of mountains with the Tories. Attlee once said that a Tory could sleep with 10 women a week, but a Labour politician cannot even look at the neighbour's wife across the fence. The times have not changed one little bit. This is a level of hypocrisy in politics that has existed since before I was born. So there's no excuse for Labour politicians and advisers not to be better at this. For example, Starmer has now said that he and senior Labour politicians will not accept gifts of clothes in future. Why? That makes it sound like you have acted improperly or at least injudiciously.
I mean, because they have. They kind of have by accepting these donations. Because again, I don't know if the ministerial code doesn't include the bits around perceived conflicts of interest. But, some of this stuff, there are perceived conflicts of interest.
Why didn't he say instead, oh, there might be evidence people don't like that rule. Oh, we might have to look at changing it. We'll have a public...
Because he's an absolute idiot, that's why, and he wants to keep accepting donations. There's no good answer. He's actually, I'll couch that differently. He's either a complete idiot and he's very politically inept, or he wants to keep taking donations. It's just he wants a different kind of donations now. So he'll accept hospitality, he'll accept, maybe a holiday or whatever, but he's not going to accept clothing. That's the way he draws the line.
Consultation on the sort of rules on donations and things. That way, when you change those rules, no MP or parliamentary candidate would be allowed to accept gifts.
That's great. We should do that. We should 100% do that. I agree. We should 100% do it. So no party can take donations
in the form of clothes or buy clothes with donations. Why not do that instead?
Because the man's an idiot.
That way it screws the Tories over as well. And it doesn't make it look like you've done anything wrong, which they haven't. So sure.
They have, again, just because something's within the rules doesn't make it morally correct.
The way Labour have responded is poor. But ultimately, this is a confected row, which should never have been taken seriously in the first place. If there is ever any evidence that public money ends up in the hands of people who gave something in return for it, then we should make a fuss.
I guarantee you 100% he will not do that. And I want to keep a very big eye on that budget, especially the PFI contracts. That's the thing to keep an eye out for, because that's where the corruption can happen. So this idea that, we've got to wait and see, if there's any corruption, like, no, they've taken the money. Anything you do at that point is tainted. That's what money does. It taints things. It's a ridiculous defense, This from Professor Bernal, someone I respect, saying the idea that the media held Boris Johnson to account is a fundamental misunderstanding. They let him spout nonsense for years with devastating results for the UK, and only when Pippa Carrera et al. Finally broke the damn thing did anything else happen, which is true. It was only when we really found out about Partygate, it's when the media went after him and they realised that they had massive stories they can put out there, and people were properly engaged with politics at that point, because this was not just a personal level but a policy level. The Johnson shenanigans over Theresa May's Brexit deal, the lies about the border in Ireland were obvious to us, but the media said pretty much bugger all. Indeed, they're all still repeating the same nonsense now, and this is the important thing here. Like, the media does decide to an extent who basically lives politically, who lives and who dies. But it was only because of leaks we found this stuff out. And that's one of the things that, I think Starmer has learned, like, certain things will always get out. Your darkest secrets will always come to light. So I think that's one of the things he learned from Boris Johnson. That's why he made the declaration late, because he probably realised something could come out here and it'll be damaging. That's just my opinion anyways. And you got clowns like this, talking, Brexit hardman Steve Baker saying the electorate will not forget how Labour politicians have had their snots in the trough, accepting gifts and experiences from donors whilst in opposition, says Conservative MP, despite the fact that this is the guy who had Boris Johnson as his Prime Minister, who had a donor do up his flat. Like, anyone who gives the Tories a platform to spout this nonsense and doesn't push back on it is just a client journalist. Again, we go to the last defender of Labour, or the main defender of Labour, really, coming up with this nonsense argument.
Friend of the truly corrupt politician, the greatest friend of the riot inciters, for example, the greatest friend of the politically inept is the one who will keep making excuses for them and straw man and lie. That's the greatest friend of the average politician, the mid politician. The one that is inept, that cannot do their job properly. Their greatest friend is the journalist who will go to bat for them and claim that at least they are not as bad as the other people. Because that way, that average politician, the mid politician, will not have to do their job properly, because they know that as long as they operate on a scale of 4 or 5 out of 10, they will always be able to fall back on the defence of, at least I'm not a 2 or a 1 out of 10. Of them is the line they're all as bad as each other, because they're really not. Which is how today we find ourselves bombarded with coverage of Keir Starmer's declared hospitality. And we are supposed to be much angrier than we were about Boris Johnson's undeclared largesse. One example of which, his flat decoration, exceeded the sum total of everything Keir Starmer has received since becoming leader of the Labour Party. The greatest friend of the...
That's the greatest friend of the average politician. One who is mid. This man right here. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. It's been a very long video. I don't think it would go for this long, probably because I fumbled it at the start, but we're an hour in here, so if you make it to the end somehow, I respect you, and also pray for your sanity, because it's rough on the high seas of Labour corruption. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.